baby.
Here. Ladies and gentlemen, the subcommittee on the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia, and on the Indo-Pacific will come to order. The purpose of this joint hearing is to discuss the President's fiscal year 2025 budget request for the State Department's Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs and USAID's Bureau for Asia. I now recognize myself for an opening statement, and I'm going to begin by actually deferring to Chairwoman Kim.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson. I'm delighted that both of our subcommittee on Indo-Pacific and subcommittee on the Middle East and North Africa can work together to examine the FY25 budget for South and Central Asia. This hearing presents an opportunity for our subcommittees to shape the United States' approach to such a critical region. South Asia holds immense significance for our foreign policy and national security interests. The region faces a dynamic geopolitical landscape that presents challenges for U.S. policy objectives. The Indian Ocean is a crucial channel for global trade. An estimated 80% of maritime oil trade and 40% of world trade passes through the Indian Ocean. The CCP is making inroads into key choke points along these routes and obstructing the right to freely navigate the waters. In recent years, we have seen Chinese ports in Pakistan and Sri Lanka, military installations in Djibouti, and infrastructure investments in the Maldives, which threaten the U.S. national security and economic interests, and those of our friends and allies in the region. Last month, my subcommittee held a hearing on the Indo-Pacific budget and CCP aggression in the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. We cannot forget the significance of Indo in the Indo-Pacific. The CCP has sparked border conflicts along the line of control in India, and its submarines and warships regularly sail in the Indian Ocean. I'm particularly concerned about the Maldives, a key U.S. security partner in the Indian Ocean, and its growing relationship with the CCP. The Maldives, having received several large CCP investments, including $200 million for the China-Maldives Friendship Bridge, is $1.4 billion in debt to the CCP. During the Maldives president's visit with Xi Jinping in January, the two countries signed an additional 20 bilateral agreements. The CCP is a top trading partner for Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, which surround our strategic partner, India. The PLA's presence is also intensifying both along the Indian border and in the Indian Ocean. Aid and cooperation play a pivotal role not only in advancing U.S. interests in South Asia, but also in enhancing their prosperity and keeping the region free and open. Without greater U.S. support, our allies and friends could be forced to accept further trade and investment from the CCP. As South Asia grapples with refugee crises that are the result of bitter wars and coups, increasing CCP coercion and debt trap diplomacy tactics, and terrorism and criminal drug networks, strong and sustained U.S. engagement is critical. So I look forward to hearing from the witnesses and members of both committees. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Young Kim. We now proceed to our ranking member, Dean Phillips of Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our wonderful witnesses, and to Chair Kim for being with us today, and all of you to discuss the Biden administration's fiscal year 2025 budget request for South and Central Asia. We are living through a pivotal time, we all know that, not just in the United States, but around the world, a time in which we are faced with a stark choice between democracy or autocracy, freedom or dictatorship, and so much more. And if I can relay one message during today's meeting and hearing, it is that there is no substitute whatsoever for American leadership or a robust foreign assistance budget, which is necessary to ensure that our State Department, USAID, and related agencies can support the best possible people, programs, and policies for us to lead, engage, and improve lives all around the world. I'm eager to hear from our witnesses about how our state and foreign ops budget, which House Republicans have proposed cutting by about 12% this year, will enable us to continue to execute this very important work. Last September, in an historic first, President Biden met with all 5 Central Asian heads of state together on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. As China and Russia compete and coerce to gain access to Central Asian markets and natural resources, the Biden administration has chosen to place our shared interests at the center of this relationship, including prioritization of territorial sovereignty, energy independence, counterterrorism, economic development, and human rights. There are many opportunities to build on these mutual interests, and I'd like to hear from our administration witnesses today how the FY25 budget request reflects these expanding and strengthening partnerships both bilaterally and multilaterally between the U.S., Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. It is important for the United States to present a consistent and credible alternative to Russian and Chinese influence in Central Asia, particularly as China expands its economic and diplomatic activity in the region, and as Moscow increasingly relies on Central Asian countries to facilitate the flow of Chinese and European goods to support its illegal war in Ukraine. Pakistan is also facing critical challenges, but also opportunities. The last time Assistant Secretary Liu was in front of this committee was to discuss Pakistan's February elections, which defied expectations, but also raised credible concerns related to the pre-poll manipulation, internet and cell service cuts, and undue restrictions on freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. Although independent candidates supporting Prime Minister Imran Khan's party, PTI, won a plurality of seats, a new coalition government was formed under Shahbaz Sharif that excluded PTI. I was encouraged by the attempts soon thereafter to bridge the political divide and to pursue, where appropriate, cases disputing election results through the judicial system. However, Imran Khan's continued detention, as well as some coalition partners calling to completely ban PTI, caused continued concern about the rule of law and the rising political temperature across the country. So I'm eager to hear also today from our witnesses about these recent developments, how such political turmoil might impact the economic and security environment, and how the U.S. is supporting Pakistan in strengthening its democratic institutions and rule of law. In addition to promoting democratic values, supporting Pakistan's economy is a key strategic goal of our bilateral relationship. After facing one of the worst economic crises in its history, Pakistan and the IMF recently reached a staff-level agreement that would deliver much-needed support to Pakistan's ailing economy. Pakistan has also agreed to make significant structural reforms that include phasing out incentives for its special economic zones and expanding the tax base to include more of the country's ag sector. While painful, these changes are very necessary to ensure lasting economic stability in the country. Economic and political stability in Pakistan is not just good for the Pakistani people, but for the entire region. Pakistan and the C5 have faced increasing security challenges since the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan in August of 2021. Increasing attacks on Pakistani security forces by Tehrik-e-Taliban, or the TTP, as well as ongoing recruitment and radicalization efforts of individuals of Central Asian background by the Islamic State Khorasan province, are also growing threats. Earlier this year, General Kurilla, head of the U.S. Central Command, said that ISIS-KP retains, quote, retains the capability and the will to attack United States and Western interests abroad. That is why it remains critical for the United States to engage with the Taliban when absolutely necessary to pursue and advance core American national security interests, which include promoting counterterrorism and counter-narcotics efforts, ensuring relocation flights for Afghan allies, and advancing the rights of women and girls. While international donors have managed to stave off famine across the country, the World Food Program assesses that 12.4 million Afghans remain food insecure, and almost 24 million people, over half the population, needs humanitarian assistance. As the single largest humanitarian aid donor, providing over $2.8 billion since 2021, the United States must continue to support the Afghan people with desperately needed assistance while implementing robust oversight mechanisms and monitoring of taxpayer dollars to ensure that none of our aid directly benefits the Taliban. This is part of our commitment to the Afghan people. And as we look at some of the challenges facing South and Central Asia today, great power competition, threats to rule of law, economic and political turmoil, to name a few, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how the State Department and USAID plan to use the requested funds for FY25 to demonstrate United States leadership in order to mitigate these challenges, create opportunities, and present a vision of shared growth, prosperity, and security to our partners in South and Central Asia. With that, I'm well over time, and I thank you, and I yield back. I'll pay you back, too.
No. Hey, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Ranking Member Dean Phillips. And actually, something you're going to see is the bipartisanship here. We're going to miss Dean. He has determined not to run for re-election, but he's going to be such a vital individual helping all of us. Particularly, he's going to be helping Congressman Barra and Sherman, who are going to be remaining. And we're going to also miss Congresswoman Kathy Manning, who is not running for re-election. But it is bipartisan that we work together and just want the best. It just over and over again to be joined by Amata Radawag, and what a wonderful meeting we're going to have, and Dr. Jim Baird. So, hey, I could keep on going, and then from the Republic of Montana, Ryan Zinke. So this is amazing. So as we proceed, I want to thank all of you for being here today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to co-chair this hearing with the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Indo-Pacific, Chairwoman Young Kim of California. The purpose of this hearing is to discuss the administration's fiscal year 2025 budget request for South and Central Asia. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. The Chinese Communist Party and war criminal Putin have for too long taken advantage of their neighbors in South and Central Asia. Instability in the region benefits their malign agenda, allowing them to pursue their goals of quashing democratic opposition. They pursue debt-trap diplomacy, forcing countries like Pakistan into economic crisis. Meanwhile, war criminal Putin does everything he can to undermine the countries of Central Asia, taking advantage of fledgling democracies, attempting to entice them to stay close to Russia amidst the murderous invasion of Ukraine, as Putin seeks to recreate the failed Soviet Union to benefit oligarchs while oppressing the people of Russia. Following the disastrous surrender in Afghanistan in 2021, which resulted in the heinous killings of 13 U.S. service members and hundreds of Afghan men, women, and children, the abandonment of our partners, we have witnessed a continued effort by the Chinese Communist Party and war criminal Putin to foment instability and extremism in South and Central Asia. Many countries in the region are no longer buying the chaos and destruction that the Chinese Communist Party and war criminal Putin are selling. They are growing tired of unfettered resource theft, debt trapping, and threats to their sovereignty posed by delusional expansionist powers. The United States should look seriously at any potential avenues for mutually beneficial cooperation with the Central Asian countries. In Afghanistan, sadly, the hands of time have been turned back centuries as women and girls suffer under the terrorist rule of Taliban terrorists. Girls are prevented from getting an education, women prevented from working, and in most cases leaving the house without a male guardian. The Taliban have all but destroyed public life for women and girls in Afghanistan. Sadly, there's an expansive documentation the well-intentioned international aid is being diverted by the Taliban for their profit. Aid diversion is a widespread problem that must be addressed to continue helping those who desperately need it and advance American foreign policy objectives of human rights and stability. Terrorist groups like ISIS, Khorasan, and al-Qaeda have taken advantage of Taliban's terrorist rule and indeed become a safe haven for terrorists, using Afghanistan and Central Asia as a recruiting ground to radicalize individuals. And we see this to provide for terrorism worldwide, and sadly, with the open borders in America, placing American families at risk. We have seen growing threats from these terrorist groups today that must not be taken lightly. Throughout South and Central Asia, the Chinese Communist Party pursues their goal, the destruction of democracy around the world. The Chinese Communist Party promotes anti-democratic policies, stealing resources and labor from these countries and leaving them worse off. Chinese Communist Party colonization leaves these countries poorer and badly equipped to compete in global markets. We are in a war we did not choose, with dictators with rule of gun invading democracies with rule of law. The axis of evil grows more threatening every day and we should work together for bipartisan success. It is essential that the United States stand strong to support the spread of democracy and the prosperity and security of allies for mutual benefit. It benefits Americans, but the American foreign policy means beneficial to our allies. Additionally, allies of the United States and freedom should not be propping up dictators by purchasing cheap commodities. With the successes of the people of India, the world's largest democracy, now having the largest middle class in the world, there is just shame to me and shameful for India to continue supporting war criminal Putin in his mass slaughter of Ukrainians. I look forward to hearing from each of you on what the administration is doing to actively counter this new dictator alliance and their efforts to take advantage of South and Central Asia, destabilizing the region and the world. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, the ranking member, Änjali Kaur, for an opening statement.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the chairwoman, my good friend, the ranking member. I want to also thank the witnesses for being here. Obviously, we've underscored the importance of Central Asia, some of the challenges that we see in Pakistan, obviously the challenges that we see in Afghanistan. I'm going to focus a little bit further south on South Asia. When we think about some of the strategies that we're putting in place, the Quad becomes a core strategy for Indo-Pacific maritime security. Initiatives like the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness also become key to that strategy. That said, when we think about our budget, the importance of making sure we've got a three-legged stool, it's not just defense, but we're also funding development goals as well as diplomacy goals, is our best strategy. I appreciate the budget that's been put forth by the administration. What worries me is the Republican state foreign ops budget that recently passed that leads to a 12% reduction in funding. I think that hinders our national security, that hinders our ability to compete in the region, particularly with our main competitor in the region, the PRC. Reductions like this not only jeopardize our national security, but also compromise our capacity to effectively address humanitarian, security, and economic challenges. I would like to associate myself with some of the concerns that the chairwoman of the subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific talked about with regards to the Indian Ocean region. It is alarming when we see some of the investments and strategic locations of Beijing around Djibouti, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, even up to the Emirates. And it is incredibly important for us to take these seriously. I was in India just about a month ago. We talked to the Indian government, the importance of us working together to make sure we secure freedom of navigation, a free and open Indian Ocean region. I know I've talked to Secretary Liu about the importance of our opening the U.S. Embassy in the Maldives. Incredibly important, and we applaud the presence of Ambassador Hugo Yan. We know he's working overtime and really representing our country there. We've got to get that embassy open and continue to expand our diplomatic presence in the region. We know China's diplomatic presence in all 6 island nations of the Indian Ocean outpaces our own, and we've got to catch up. Lastly, on that trip to India, I had a chance to visit the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala, and the importance of Tibet and what may happen with succession of the Dalai Lama is incredibly vitally important. We see the Chinese Communist Party trying to wipe out a religion, a culture, and that's not what we should be doing in the 21st century. So certainly, this experience reaffirmed the importance of our unwavering support for the Tibetan people and their right to self-determination. It's imperative that we work closely with India to ensure the issue of the Dalai Lama's succession is not subject to undue pressure from Beijing. With that, I look forward to hearing from the witnesses. Again, thank you for your service to our country and work, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Barra. We are pleased to have our distinguished witnesses here from the State Department and the USAID with us today. Assistant Secretary for Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, Donald Liu, is here to speak to the State Department's budget request. Additionally, we're very grateful to have Deputy Assistant Secretary Änjali Kaur from the United States Agency of International Development, Bureau for Asia, and is also joining us to speak to USAID's priorities for FY25. Thank you for being here today. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and we'll ask that each of you keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to provide for time for member questions. I now recognize Assistant Secretary Liu for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Wilson, Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Phillips, Ranking Member Bera, members of these subcommittees. We are engaged in an important struggle in South and Central Asia. It's a struggle to compete with the PRC, to counter Russian and PRC disinformation, and to prevent terrorist groups from threatening our security. And we're grateful for the resources provided by the Congress. We also recognize we live in a world of constrained budgets. I want to propose today to talk about both our foreign policy priorities, but also the trade-offs the President is proposing in the FY25 budget. The President's budget request for this region is $1.01 billion of foreign assistance. That's a decrease of 1.9% off of FY23 levels. Our first priority is to build our partnerships in the Indo-Pacific. The PRC is seeking to secure military and commercial footholds in the Indian Ocean. Our most effective strategy to counter an assertive PRC is to demonstrate that we have something better to offer. Better development opportunities, better commercial deals, and better solutions for their security challenges. Our second priority is to build on the President's engagement last year with Central Asian leaders at the C5+1 summit in New York. Central Asian countries are reeling from the economic impact of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the crushing debt burden imposed by unsustainable PRC loans. Increasing U.S. trade and investment and expanding economic opportunities in the Central Asian region would help to stem irregular migration to the U.S. In Pakistan, we are focused on supporting democracy and human rights while advancing our critical fight against terrorism. In Afghanistan, we continue to emphasize our deep concerns about the situation for women, girls, and minority groups. In every meeting, we make clear to the Taliban there will be no significant steps toward normalization unless the rights of all Afghans are respected. In addition, the U.S. government continues to call on the Taliban to release all U.S. citizens currently in Taliban custody. What are the trade-offs? In order to advance our Indo-Pacific goals, we are redirecting additional resources to South Asia. The President is requesting $585.7 million for South Asia. That's a 4.8% increase over FY23. These funds would bolster U.S. participation in the Indo-Pacific Quad to provide maritime security, disaster relief, and quality infrastructure investment to partner countries in the Indo-Pacific. They will improve financial transparency and debt management to help the countries of the region minimize their vulnerability to PRC coercive debt. Next, in Central Asia, we are requesting $220.7 million to build on the investments we have made to boost the resilience of these countries to increased pressure from Russia and China. Our request will allow us to maintain robust levels of assistance to support the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Central Asian partners. That assistance will support border security and counterterrorism programming, job training and professional development, even as Russia seeks to expel Central Asian workers. It will support institutions of democracy in Central Asia that promote the development of a vibrant civil society, alternatives to Russian media, and investigative journalism. These are the strongest bulwarks against Russian and Chinese disinformation. In Pakistan, we face ongoing challenges and opportunities. The President's budget requests a straightlining of our $101 million Pakistan budget. That money will be used to strengthen democracy and civil society, fight terrorism and extremism, and to support economic reforms and debt management to help to stabilize Pakistan's economy and prevent further over-reliance on China. On Afghanistan, we have heard various congressional concerns, and in response, we are more narrowly targeting our assistance. The President is requesting a $104 million budget, which would represent a 12% decrease from FY23. One of our main targets of our assistance will continue to be Afghan women, girls, and minority groups, for whom the Taliban still restrict fundamental human rights and freedoms, including the right to education. Let me conclude by saying that as a former U.S. ambassador in the region, I have seen that our assistance can make a huge difference in advancing our interests in the face of fierce competition with the PRC and Russia. And I'm grateful for the support of the Congress, and in particular for the engagement, visits, and oversight provided by these subcommittees. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Liu. We now recognize Ms. Kaur for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you. Chairman Wilson, Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Phillips, Ranking Member Bera, and distinguished committee members. Thank you for inviting me to testify on USAID's role in advancing U.S. foreign policy priorities in South Asia and Central Asia. I'd like to first reflect on the passing of Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. I, along with the wider USAID community and our State Department colleagues, extend our condolences to her family and friends. As the founder of the Congressional Pakistan Caucus, her support for the people of Pakistan, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic and the 22 floods, was deeply felt. She leaves an indelible legacy as a champion of human rights and women's rights, and we're grateful for her years of leadership and dedication to American foreign policy. Turning briefly to Bangladesh, we remain concerned about the levels of unrest, and we're working in close coordination with our USAID mission and State Department colleagues to ensure the safety of our staff. In complex situations with strongly held opinions, peaceful civil discourse is essential to the future, and hoping for the de-escalation of tensions and avenues of nonviolent engagement there soon. On the FY25 request, South and Central Asia is home to enormous opportunities, growing potential for stronger regional cooperation, improved democratic governance, and responsible stewardship of natural resources. As one of the 3 essential lines of effort in U.S. foreign policy, diplomacy, development, and defense, USAID partnerships help the region address its most pressing challenges. Our approach starts not with the question of what we are against, but rather with what we are for. Supporting our partners to meet their own goals and aspirations, elevating transparency, partnership, and good governance, and championing respect for human rights and democratic norms. These are all foundations for sustainable development. USAID works in lockstep with Congress to achieve our ambitious objectives, and as Administrator Power noted in her FY25 testimony, we recognize the need for trade-offs, and we appreciate your support to deliver even better value for money. The FY25 USAID request for South and Central Asia, including Afghanistan and Pakistan, is $832.9 million. This is a $14.5 million decrease, or 2% below the FY23 enacted levels. The FY25 request strategically focuses investments on a set of key efforts. First, connectivity. USAID will increase trade and investment diversification toward more inclusive and sustainable partnerships. We will support countries to resist coercive and unfair trade and investment practices. Second, our demand-driven climate change activities will reduce emissions, strengthen energy security, enhance climate adaptation and mitigation, and protect critical ecosystems and biodiversity. Third, through our affirmative development approach, we will strengthen good governance and improve basic service delivery, including health and education. And fourth, to bolster economic empowerment, gender equity, and human rights, USAID will work to increase women's political, civic, and economic engagement, address gender inequality, improve inclusion for persons with disabilities, and combat gender-based violence. I want to provide a few examples of how we're doing this. As a C5+ run regional connectivity ministerial last year was hosted by Administrator Power, we were able to sign MOUs with our Central Asian partners to boost regional economic connectivity, energy sector efficiencies, and responsible resource management, all in line with our C5 partners' priorities. And second, I was also honored to recently join HVAC Ranking Member Meeks in New Delhi, along with Ranking Member Bera, where with our Indian partners, we formally signed our statement of intent to establish the Gandhi King Development Foundation. This historic partnership will advance inclusive development in public health, climate, and the empowerment of women. I thank the ranking member for his continued support and look forward to working with the wider committee on this and other development priorities. USAID will advance democratic development as an underpinning for growth and prosperity, lifting up everyone. Delivering tangible development results with our partners demonstrates the value of our model and the enduring strength of partnership with the United States. And your support is critical to US leadership and influence in this region and the wider world. I look forward to your counsel and to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kaur. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. You may know we recently passed out of committee markup a bipartisan bill that I co-led, the Rohingya Genocide Accountability and Protection Act. And this bill will establish a comprehensive U.S. approach to improve humanitarian assistance, protection, and educational opportunities for the Rohingya. The U.S. is the world's leading contributor of aid towards the Rohingya crisis. However, since 2017, aid from the international community has been shrinking. So first question to you, Assistant Secretary Liu. Could you talk to us about what you are doing to get other countries to increase their assistance to the refugees and host communities?
Thank you, Chairwoman Kim. I had the chance to visit the Cox's Bazar refugee camp in Bangladesh last July. I have spent 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in Africa. I've seen some pretty desperate areas of poverty in the world. I have never seen anything like the conditions in this camp. Really unacceptable, and I share your concern that we are, as an international community, not providing sufficient support to the Rohingya for their ability to sustain simple livelihood there. Maybe I should start by saying we are very grateful that Bangladesh continues to host this enormous population of refugees from Burma. It's a sacrifice for their people and their government, and we are grateful. We are talking with the Bangladeshi government about what it would take to co-host a pledging conference in New York in September. We did that last year with them, but sadly, that was a pledging conference where only the United States pledged more money. And all the other countries that came were unable to commit more funding. We are talking about more strategic ways to get particularly countries from the Organization of the Islamic Conference more involved in supporting the really difficult conditions that exist on the ground for this refugee community.
Ms. Kaur, can you talk about USAID's work specifically related to Rohingya with local organizations in host communities to address this refugee crisis? And how is USAID strengthening local organizational capacity to better utilize USAID funding?
That's a great question. Thank you. And like Assistant Secretary Liu, I've gone to Cox's Bazar several times. I spent the night in Bhasan Char because I wanted to understand what is happening in some of the worst circumstances, even outside of Cox's Bazar. And I think what we've realized is that you have to have a two-pronged approach. You have to be able to support host communities who are being impacted by the influx of over 1 million refugees. And we have to do that side by side with the Bangladeshi government. So we're making sure that we support those communities with modernization of agriculture, being able to support education, being able to capacity build, support livelihoods in many ways so that community continues to grow and is resilient and be able to respond to the crisis and the environment around them. And within Cox's Bazar and Bhasan Char, we've really been promoting, together with the State Department, and pushing for livelihoods and being able to increase livelihood opportunities, which we've had conversations with the government and being able to do so. Because of the support that we have received from all of you, we've been able to increase food rations. And I know that you've realized that this has been a key concern across Cox's Bazar and Bhasan Char. And we have now been able to increase those rations 2 times since January, from $8 a month to $11 per person per month. And our goal is to be able to reach full ration, which is $12.50 per person per month, which I know feels like nothing, but it is a step up from where we were, and we're able to support the World Food Program and being able to provide increased nutritional benefits to this population. That,
Thank you.
together with livelihoods, is going to be a good approach in moving forward, together with supporting the host communities.
Thank you very much for that. I do want to put in some other questions too, and shift to Maldives' growing relationship with the CCP. Assistant Secretary Liu, in March, the Maldives and CCP signed a military pact in which the CCP agreed to provide military assistance to the island nation. So as CCP's presence grows in Maldives' security apparatus and critical infrastructure, what threat does this pose to the U.S. interests?
What's interesting to me is this military relationship with the Maldives, between the Maldives and People's Republic of China, is only now starting. We have the opportunity to shape that relationship through competition. If you're the Maldives, you have a
There is no change in the budget request dedicated to Maldives for FY25. So can you talk briefly about, or quickly, what is your plan to ramp up bilateral cooperation with the Maldives to decrease its dependence on CCP?
Within the administration, we're talking now about allocation of the Indo-Pacific supplemental, and we've had very specific discussions about how some of that money may be used to support the Maldives, and we look forward to consulting with Congress about the use of those funds.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let me now turn to Ranking Member Phillips for your questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Kaur, let me just start with you. And we know that Kyrgyzstan has long been known as a relative island of democracy in a sea of autocrats, hosted robust civil society, and had a population appreciative of democratic values and secularism and relatively independent judiciary. Of course, President Japarov, under his leadership, the country's fallen dramatically backwards. His recent Russian-style foreign agents law, of course, imposing onerous reporting and government oversight requirements on NGOs that receive foreign funding, is terribly disappointing. So my question is direct. How is Washington raising these issues of democratic backsliding, and particularly relative to that foreign agents law with the Kyrgyz government?
It's a great and very important question, and I know that my colleague, as being former ambassador to Kyrgyzstan, will also step in with some of his thoughts. I think what's been surprising to us over the years is seeing such a vibrant democracy in Kyrgyzstan change over this past several years and backslide to the extent that we're seeing by laws and legislation such as this. And it's not just Kyrgyzstan. We're seeing this domino effect. It's that it happens in Kyrgyzstan and it travels across the region. And what we seek to do with our resources that you're providing us is being able to ensure that we can provide resilience, resources, legal aid, support, emergency funding to these organizations, be able to create a vibrant civic participation, especially amongst young people, understanding their rights, engaging with the institutions, work on capacity building with the institutions.
If I could just add, just because time is limited, if you could just be direct, though, about how have we brought up this subject
Directly.
to the Kyrgyz government? Okay, we have.
So
yes.
with the de facto prime minister, Japarov
Right.
came to Washington, D.C. I joined Administrator Power in that meeting directly with him where we raised these concerns. We've offered alternatives. We've offered to work with him in revamping this legislation and thinking about what type of legislation would actually be appropriate for a vibrant civil society to
How was that
continue to
received?
exist. It was received with an open mind. I think we're going to engage and see how that takes place.
Okay, terrific. I do want to move on to Afghanistan because with both of you, and time is somewhat limited. So let me just state the obvious. I think most of us want to help from a very human and humanitarian perspective suffering Afghans, and none of us want to see the Taliban enriched by so doing. I know it's a challenge. So first question, starting with you, Mr. Liu, what steps does the U.S. take to ensure that humanitarian assistance reaches the people in Afghanistan and doesn't benefit the Taliban?
So our oversight, our monitoring of distribution of U.S. assistance in Afghanistan has some of the most strict conditions anywhere in the world. We provide assistance only through UN agencies, international NGOs, American NGOs, and trusted local implementers, period. No money goes through the Taliban or to the Taliban. I'm aware that SIGAR has made accusations that large amounts of money from the international community generally, not specific to America, has gone to the Taliban. We're studying very closely those allegations. What I can see, looking at them as a whole, is that they're talking about things like utility payments for services. They're talking about license and registration fees. They're talking about things that look like taxes in other countries, and we should understand that and prevent that wherever possible, but we are not talking about USAID or other donors giving money directly to the Taliban.
I appreciate it. On that subject, because of course in the SIGAR report, that $11 million in the big scheme of things is not much, but of course none of us here want to see a penny enriching them. So we all, of course, encourage anything we can do to prevent that. Ms. Kaur, did you have any comments on that too?
Yeah, I just wanted to double down on our safeguards and risk mitigation. We've got third-party monitors. We do everything possible to ensure that diversion does not occur. And when there are any signs of diversion occurring, we intervene immediately.
Can you give any specific example? That
Yeah,
would be very
absolutely.
helpful.
I mean, I just want to talk about the process that we have.
Because we have 30 seconds, I just want to make sure
Our
we get it in.
partners reach out to Taliban provincial representatives when a sense of diversion occurs. We ensure that they're aware that diversion has been attempted. We explain that diversion will not be tolerated, result in suspension of attempts if it's continued, secure commitments to ensure that aid could be delivered without attempted interference. And we've done this specifically in a province when we understood that diversion was occurring earlier this last year. And we stopped all aid and we had these conversations, and specifically our partners in this province voluntarily suspended operations. And then through the UN humanitarian leadership, led a delegation specifically to secure commitments from the Taliban provincial representatives to ensure that aid could be delivered without attempted interference. So people recognize that we need
Time's
to
up.
engage
If you
with the
can wrap up,
community.
please.
Okay, thank you. My time has expired. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I now recognize Rep. Barr for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Secretary Lew, Andy Barr over here. As you may know, I come from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and us Kentuckians, we always like to talk about the diplomatic value of bourbon. And so let me ask you about bourbon exports to India for a minute. As Vice Chair of the Congressional India Caucus, I look for opportunities for the United States and India to enjoy greater economic cooperation. One hurdle to greater cooperation, however, is India's 150% tariff rate on imported spirits, particularly Kentucky bourbon. Have you worked with the Indian government or the USTR to address Indian tariff rates?
Representative, I love that question. I happen to be the Deputy Chief of Mission, the #2 in the embassy, about 12 years ago. And then Agriculture Secretary Vilsack, who is still Agriculture Secretary today, came out specifically to talk about tariffs on things like bourbon. And he was just in these incredibly intensive discussions before President Obama came to visit. We thought we were at the 10-yard line. We were going to get this through. These are some of the hardest things for us as two big democracies to achieve actual tangible results on, because we are two big agricultural nations. We both produce food for our people, and we're both very jealous about how we guard the ability to bring in foodstuffs, including from your great state, into each other's countries. We have seen progress, and we have seen progress just in this year in some of those tariffs on foodstuffs, but it is trench warfare with our Indian friends on both sides. It's not going one way. What I know is we are very committed to bringing down those tariffs.
Well, we want to work with you. We want to work
Sure.
with the USTR. This is 150% tariff rate is an impediment and I say this with great fondness to our Indian friends, it is an impediment to our friendship, our alliance. Economic integration should be a priority as much as the strategic cooperation we're having with the Quad, and as much as we want to decrease India's dependence on Russian energy, Russian weapons systems. Our economic relationship is a barrier to furthering this important alliance between two great democracies. And I would urge the administration, the State Department, and the USTR to prioritize market access in India, the most populous nation in the world, in order to advance the important strategic relationship with India. And of course, our Kentucky distilleries are ready to further that spirit.
Sir, if I could just add, I was deputy to then Ambassador Tim Romer, a former member of this House. I can remember Ambassador Romer serving bourbon at 4th of July. So
Wonderful.
we are trying very
wonderful,
hard.
Wonderful. We can cheers to that.
advocate.
We can cheers to that. Assistant Secretary Liu, let me ask you about Russian oil. India pays some of the highest prices for Russian oil since the G7 price cap was imposed, providing a boost to Moscow's revenues despite efforts by Western nations to curb the producer's income and funding for the Ukraine war. India has over 1 billion for people with vast energy needs. Do you think the Biden administration's pause on LNG exports helped or hurt the United States' opportunity to diversify energy sources for India and to help India reduce its dependence on Russian energy?
A very complicated question. Let me try very quickly to answer. India does import lots of Russian crude right now, and they have since the Ukraine war started. What you know, what we all know, is that crude was going to go somewhere. What we did in the G7 is to say the people who consume that crude should consume it at the lowest possible price. So a price cap of $60 a barrel was put in place. If you exceeded that price cap, you would be denied insurance
and Secretary,
financing.
Sorry to reclaim my time, but as you well know, and Secretary Yellen and I have talked about this extensively in the Financial Services Committee oversight, is Russian crude is trading above the cap, and the cap's not working. The Treasury Department has issued 9, count them, 9 general licenses to Russian banks, allowing Russian banks to process energy transactions, exports to India. And this is a gaping loophole in our sanctions against Russia. I think we need to export more American energy to India, and we need to actually deprive Putin of the financing he's using, some of it coming from India, our friends in India, to finance this further invasion of Ukraine. I urge the State Department to work with Treasury to reconsider.
Thank you.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now recognize Congressman Ami Bera of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Secretary Liu, we've chatted before, and in my opening comments, talked a little bit about our paying attention to what Beijing is doing in the Indian Ocean region strategically and so forth. I'd like to give you an opportunity from your perspective, how the State Department's thinking about that and how we might be countering that.
I would quickly say 2 things. One of the things many of the members here have talked about is debt trap diplomacy, is the use of these massive infrastructure loans to coerce countries into doing things that are economically in the interests of the PRC, but then eventually militarily and strategically. This is really dangerous. I was the ambassador to the Kyrgyz Republic as my job just prior to this. I saw the terrible effects of these white elephant huge loans that literally created roads to nowhere. Loans for projects people didn't want, loans that really angered local communities. We don't want to see that throughout the Indo-Pacific. How will we prevent it? We have to compete. We can't just tell governments this is dangerous, don't take the Chinese money. They have very few options. And so what I can see today are resources provided by this Congress are helping us to compete. Sri Lanka is a place where the PRC has been all over them, have provided loans that eventually turned out to be Chinese control of the Hambantota commercial port. We want to prevent that from being military control of that port. What are we going to do? We're going to invest, and we're going to show a better way of investing. And so DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, has almost $1 billion invested in Sri Lanka right now. We are the best investor. We are putting quality infrastructure in there, private sector led, for commercially viable projects.
Great. Let me give Administrator Kaur a chance to talk about some of the aid and development tools that would be helpful in countering the BRC in this region. And then also just if a 12% budget cut were to go into place as in the Republican, the state foreign ops budget that passed, how would that impact your ability to compete?
Thank you. I want to add to what the Assistant Secretary mentioned, and one of the points that we do across the region is that, and especially in Sri Lanka and in the Maldives, is public financial management. And I think it's so critical because it speaks to the notion of the debt trap. And once these countries are in a situation where they don't know, or their systems or institutions are not strong enough to respond to the levels of debt they're dealing with, our technical assistance, we've put in a whole team that supports the Ministry of Finance in Maldives. We're doing the same thing in Sri Lanka side by side with the IMF when we're looking at the diagnostics and the governance systems. Our work and our systems are helping privatize companies in Sri Lanka. It's helping get them across the finish line so they don't stay in that state for so long and be exposed to greater predatory lending. And so this is one of the efforts that we lead through our work that's been really helpful. What we do with India, which is a new approach that we've tried, is trilateral cooperation. And so what we're doing is we're going to third countries, some in South Asia, the Pacific, and we're really looking at how do we start creating global public goods or addressing key development challenges in those third countries, and recognizing by providing that alternative, we create a different path. We create other sustainable, transparent options that other countries, especially the most vulnerable countries, can utilize as an option outside of the PRC.
Can you give us a couple specific examples of how we might be working with India on aid and development going into those third countries or going into African countries and just leveraging resources?
Would love to. We just had a really great India-US-Africa dialogue 2 months back. And in that, we've already taken the next steps to be able to start doing study tours in Tanzania, in Kenya. We're looking at Mozambique as a few countries in Africa where we're looking at being able to provide digital resources, digitizing healthcare, digitizing education systems, thinking about how do we build resilient food systems, how do we think about being able to protect natural resource management, agricultural apps that India has been doing so successfully, Silicon Valley does every day, that we can combine and bring towards some of these key countries. We've done some of this work in PNG already, and so we're really looking at where the priorities of these key vulnerable countries are and what we have to offer together.
Great. And I've only got 10 seconds left, so I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Bera. And again, thank each of you for being here today. And Secretary Liu, as a former co-chair of the Caucus of India and Indian Americans, this month I was shocked and saddened to see the embrace by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who I so respect and admire, embrace war criminal Putin in Moscow on the very day that Putin intentionally launched missiles at the largest children's hospital in Kyiv, Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi is a hero of mine, who I have visited in New Delhi, have welcomed twice to address Congress, along with being present with Governor Nikki Rondella Haley of South Carolina, at Madison Square Garden in New York City. I was with President Donald Trump at the Howdy Modi welcome for Prime Minister Modi. 40,000 people there in Houston, Texas, and it turned out something I know. It was the largest assemblage of millionaires in the history of the world because the Indian American community has been so successful. The future of India should be with democratic free markets. As we have seen, Indian Americans have achieved the highest level of income of any immigrant group in the United States. In fact, Indian Americans make twice the income of the average American, and indeed it's due to association with democracy, not dictatorship. And the dictatorship, what war criminal Putin is trying to restore, the failed Soviet Union, and he wants to oppress first the people of Russia, and it's to the benefit not of the people of Russia, but to the oligarchs, just as the communist regime was to benefit the ranking members of the Communist Party. With that in mind, India should be a beacon for democracy and not dependent on a dictatorship. What can be done, Mr. Secretary, to promote India not being dependent on inferior Russian weapons and cheap commodities? And we know that the gas that's being purchased, the funding of that is going to kill Ukrainians.
Mr. Chairman, I could not agree with you more about our disappointment about the symbolism and the timing of Prime Minister Modi's trip to Moscow. We are having those tough conversations with our Indian friends, I assure you. Maybe if I could just take a moment to put into context that visit. Prime Minister Modi, 2 weeks before he went to Moscow, also saw President Zelensky on the margins of the G7 summit in Italy. Then we were looking very carefully at what Modi did when he was in Moscow. We did not see any new major defense deals. We saw no major discussion of technology cooperation. In addition, you have Modi having said in front of Putin on live television his feeling that the war in Ukraine could not be won on the battlefield, and the pain that he felt watching the death of children in war, a clear reference to the bombing of the Children's Hospital in Kyiv that happened while he was there. I share your concern about this visit, sir, and we are trying very hard to communicate those concerns directly to the Indians who have canceled billions of dollars in defense purchases over these last 2.5 years because the Russians, they can't deliver anymore. And so we're working very hard on that, sir.
Well, Secretary Lew, please, my heart's been with the people of India. My dad served in India during World War II with the Flying Tigers. And so it's just been so exciting to see that country come to life after decades of socialist government with no achievement, and now the largest middle class in the history of the world. But complicity with war criminal Putin is beyond what we should have. Additionally, another challenge indeed is Central Asia. And these are countries that are fledgling democracies, but also they were former Soviet republics. And so it should be recognized that war criminal Putin, as he tries to restore and recreate the failed Soviet Union to benefit oligarchs, that would include the new countries of Central Asia. What can be done to protect them from the restoration of the failed Soviet empire?
Sir, the Central Asian people are very angry at Russia right now. They're angry for the economic hardship they're facing because of Putin's unprovoked war in Ukraine, but they're also now angry at the fact that ethnic Central Asian people are being expelled from Russia, are being discriminated against. There's violence being committed against them. At the same time that's happening from Russia, we are trying to spend the money that Congress has provided through previous Ukraine supplementals to do job creation, to those migrant workers who are flooding back from Russia into Central Asia are being retrained with U.S. taxpayer dollars to be productive citizens in their own countries, to find economic opportunity for their families in their home countries so they don't have to migrate further. We're teaching them English. We're coming up with ways that the products that they produce can be exported, not through Russia, but through the Caspian. All that's being done with money provided by this Congress.
Well, thank you for what you're doing, because the future of the Central Asian countries should be bright. And I know the American perspective, we want them to be mutually beneficial in terms of economic and political success. With that, I now return. We go back to California again. Can you believe it? Congressman Brad Sherman.
Thank you, and I want to thank you, Assistant Secretary Lew, for spending an hour in my office. I asked many questions then, but believe it or not, I've got more now. I want to first start on Afghanistan. Former President Trump has said that there was an 18-month period in his administration when none of our servicemen were killed in Afghanistan. Is that true?
I'd have to refer you to the Department of Defense, sir.
I would point out that here's the chart of those who died. We lost 14 in 2017, 15 in 2018, 23 in 2019, and 11 in 2020. 63 of our servicemen killed in action during the Trump administration. during which we achieved absolutely nothing. Had we left on the first day of the Trump administration, Afghanistan would not be any worse than it is now. In this committee, the Biden administration has been criticized for not going around Afghanistan and collecting the weapons. $11.5 billion of those weapons were sent there under the Trump administration. That's 15 times more weapons than Biden sent. These weapons are the most valuable thing that anybody in an Afghan village owns. If we were to have deployed 2,000 or 3,000 troops to roam all over Afghanistan, demanding that these armed people give us back the weapons, would we have incurred casualties, or would they have just said, "Oh, yeah, these are yours"? Could we have forcibly taken these weapons back? Could we have forced people to give us these back without any casualties?
We could not have.
Thank you. I want to focus on Pakistan. First, they banned the bat symbol of the PTI. Then they banned the batsman, cricketer Imran Khan. Now they're looking to ban the batsman's party. The information minister and 2 other ministers have said that they want to ban the PTI. Those same ministers have said they're looking to cancel the ID cards and passports of overseas Pakistanis just because they criticize the government. So that's an attack on the First Amendment rights of American citizens, dual citizens, and green card holders. We see in the latest development that the PTI office has been sealed and their national information secretary and many women have been arrested. We have an opportunity to demonstrate we're dedicated to democracy and human rights, because the PTI is not as pro-American as other parties in Afghanistan. If we look at individual issues that you deal with, they are not as helpful. But they are the largest party in Pakistan. Their leader is in prison, may face death. The best thing you can do is ask Ambassador Bloom to go visit Imran Khan in prison, and I wonder if you'd consider that.
I will definitely discuss it with Ambassador Bloom.
Thank you. I'd like to now focus on Sindh, to commend, and you should expand your communication in the Sindhi language, the language of southern Pakistan. We see, I just want to mention Priya Kumari, Hindu girl who's been missing after being kidnapped and perhaps forced to convert and marry an older man. We see political activists, Hind Yata Lohar, well, at least I can pronounce the second name, Lohar, subject to political murder, and journalist Nasrullah Ghanani, also killed, gunned down. And I would hope that you would direct our office to focus on these abuses of human rights. Finally, we've got H-1B visa holders that are required to go back to their home countries, which disrupts their whole lives just to renew their American paperwork. Also disrupts the companies they work for. You've got a pilot program to say, hey, maybe they can renew these right in your Westwood office, located in America's best state. How's that pilot program going?
Sir, very successfully. Tens of thousands of Indians.
What do you need so that you can make this not a pilot program?
We are
but standard?
already prepared to roll this out as a full-scale program, we hope later this year.
And you could substantially shorten wait times for visas in India if the government of India would allow you to put 15 more consular officers in India. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And we've got these 15 positions ready to go. And if the Indian government would simply allow them to be there, we wouldn't see, and this would reduce wait times for both immigrant visas and tourist visas?
Yes, sir.
It's about time the Indian government did that. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Sherman. We now proceed to Dr. Rich McCormick, Congressman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will just start by addressing what I just heard from the other side of the aisle about the casualties in Afghanistan. I find it funny that they would grandstand off the 15 or 11 or however many fatalities per year. I happen to be in Afghanistan in 2017 as a head of emergency medicine in Kandahar. During 2017, thankfully, we had very few casualties compared to the hundreds we had during Obama. And I was also not there during the withdrawal, which we saw pretty much more people died that one day than you had the entire year of 2017. I just make the case that it was the worst withdrawal ever in military history for the United States. I stand by that. It was a crushing blow to the morale
the
of our
gentleman
troops,
yield?
including, I will not. I think I've earned this. The men and women who served over in Afghanistan experienced something that will scar them for life because of that horrible withdrawal. With that said, I want to address a few things that I think you guys would be able to address better than most. President Biden's, speaking of Afghanistan, his withdrawal from Afghanistan left significant gaps in our counterterrorism efforts in Central Asia. In recent months, many officials have begun to raise alarms about rising threats posed by ISIS-K. Mr. Liu, what is the administration's plan to counter ISIS-K threat, particularly in Central Asia?
Congressman, first let me thank you for your service in Afghanistan and all of those men and women who served with you. Second, as someone, myself and my family who've spent a considerable number of years in Central Asia and in Pakistan, these are places right now that feel sincerely the threat being posed by this terrorist group, ISIS Khorasan province. We are working very determinedly, state, working with CIA, working with CENTCOM to make sure that we uphold President Biden's commitment that we will not allow groups based out of Afghanistan, terrorist groups, to threaten our partners and allies throughout this region. We see that today. There are very determined efforts to combat it. Sir, if you allow me, happy in closed session to provide you details of what we're doing.
I would like that. And how are we engaging with Central Asian countries such as Tajikistan to counter the ISIS-K as far as the coordination between countries? I know a lot of these countries are very poor. They reach out to us on occasion to keep us kind of, so we're not isolated away from China and their influences.
Well, sir, we have really very robust counterterrorism cooperation between the U.S. military, Tajikistan, and our intelligence services as well to help them understand the threat that they're facing. One of the most important things that we can do specific to Tajikistan is help them to make sure they're providing services to the poorest of their communities. Terrorism grows in part from radicalism, and that festers in places where people are so poor they can't feed their families. And that's where I know Ms. Kaur and her team are working night and day to make sure that we are providing the money that you give us through the Congress to make sure it gets into the
On a related
hands
note,
of
I think that's an important thing. This is an investment. It's an investment to keep people from going over to other people who are also making investments, whether it be China or Russia or Iran, other countries who have nefarious purposes. Between the active conflicts in Ukraine and Israel and anti-American forces at home who advocate for our withdrawal from the rest of the world, in other words, isolationists, today's day and age finds U.S. global leadership constantly challenged. And I would say if we don't have leadership, if we don't have global leadership, we will have globalism. This is something to counter that. We must remain robust partnerships and alliances with nations that share our interests and values in critical regions like South and Central Asia. Amongst those partners are also Pakistan. That's why I introduced HRES 901, affirming U.S. support for democracy in that country, an investment in the future of that country to be more like us and less like them, if you will. The House passed this resolution on June 25th, thanks to my colleagues and Representative Dan Kildee, and thank you for their support. I commend your Bureau's findings request to strengthen democracies and institutions in Pakistan and promote that rule of law and encourage the sector of private sector to continue to grow. However, China has vastly outspent us throughout the entire region, especially in Pakistan since 2012. And they're making solid progress in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor known as CPEC. This gives China significant leverage over Pakistan. I'm really worried about the future as we invest. How do we leverage our position with Pakistan, our historic relationship, given also our relationship with India, and that's developing very quickly? How do we balance that and keep that in our advantage?
In the 2 seconds I have, I'll say China is the past in terms of investments in Pakistan. We are the future.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCormick. We now proceed to Congresswoman Kathy Manning of North Carolina.
Thank you to my friends, Chairs Joe Wilson and Young Kim, and Ranking Members Dean Phillips and Ami Bera for organizing this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for your service to our country. Assistant Secretary Liu, Last month, the government of Maldives, which your bureau handles, announced that the country would ban Israeli passport holders from entering the country due to the war in Gaza. And later that month, Secretary Blinken welcomed the Maldives foreign minister and highlighted an upcoming $2 million in planned assistance to the Maldives. Can you tell us what the State Department has done to reverse the ban, and whether you believe that U.S. taxpayer assistance should go to a luxury tourist destination that bans Jewish Israelis from entering the country?
Thank you. I'm so glad that you asked this question. There's been a lot of misinformation in the media about what's happening in the Maldives with respect to any restrictions on Israeli citizens. You are correct in saying we have intensely engaged the government of the Maldives over this past month at the level of the Secretary of State, and then I recently, with the Deputy Secretary of State, met with the Minister of Economy, and then our ambassador met with the President of the Maldives. There is no ban. They have said that loud and clear to us. What you see in the media is not accurate. You have members of the opposition in the Maldives saying there should be a ban, but they have never introduced that in their parliament.
Okay, if you could provide my office with something in writing to back that up, I would greatly appreciate it, and we'd be happy to get it out to the press.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Let me ask you about another issue. Last week, the State Department unveiled the Global Guidelines for Countering Anti-Semitism, a major commitment made by more than 30 countries and international organizations to act against rising anti-Semitism and implement best practices to protect the Jewish communities around the globe. As head of the Bureau of South and Central Asia, will you commit to making sure that the chiefs of mission in your region are aware of and actively engage in advancing these guidelines to our partner countries?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Now we'll move to Afghanistan. The Taliban's rule, as you mentioned, has been devastating for women and girls in Afghanistan. They have imposed more than 100 draconian decrees on Afghan women, forcibly treating them like property, limiting their ability to work, to get an education, or to move freely in public without their husbands or male relatives. It's been devastating for the women in Afghanistan, women we talked with by Zoom before our exit from Afghanistan. Civil society and media organizations have crumbled without anyone openly speaking in opposition to the Taliban's rules without facing threats and violence. So what meaningful opportunities remain for Afghan women, and how is the State Department working to reverse the Taliban's restrictions on nearly every aspect of their lives?
Representative Manning, we share the view that the edicts of the Taliban concerning women and girls are abhorrent, and we are working every day to provide the women and girls resources to make sure they have access to education at home if they're not allowed to have access in schools, but also now to think about how do we help the Taliban to reverse these decisions. We have tried for 3 years and made very little headway bilaterally. What we're now doing through something called the Doha process is having the United Nations take the lead to represent 190 countries to try to convince the Taliban that the path towards their normalization in the world, that they can have some sense of normal interactions, that goes through providing human rights, the right to education, rights for minorities to members of their community. And we see some small rays of hope that the Taliban are understanding that this is the path to their normalization.
I hope you will continue to push on that, because what's happening to the women and girls there is just devastating. Ms. Kaur, what steps are we taking to make sure that vital, life-saving humanitarian assistance is actually going to the people who need it and is not diverted by the Taliban?
Thank you for that question. I wanted to first just build upon this last point that you raised for women and girls who are a core component of all the work we do as the most vulnerable population in Afghanistan. And I wanted to highlight that we've been able to support girls' access to secondary education by training female teachers, supporting curriculum development, and improving safety and well-being of educators and students. We're being able to help women continue their post-secondary education through scholarships for both in-person and distance learning at institutions like AUAF. And during the most recent AUAF application season, we got more than 10,000 applicants. It broke the server. So it shows you that the demand is there and we're being able to harness and galvanize it. We're also supporting apprenticeship and on-the-job training for women in the carpet and jewelry sectors and providing technical support and learning opportunities for women entrepreneurs. So making sure that we can still create a resilient population there. As I had said earlier, we are very keen on making sure diversion does not happen. It is a threat to our programs, and we recognize that. And so we have third-party monitoring systems. We've got robust risk systems that are in place. We do everything possible and have trainings for our implementing partners to be aware, to assess, to always continuously assess programs. When you see anything that is a potential diversion, they will self-suspend because they recognize the danger that's there. And
Thank
they're working
you.
with their
I'm going to
communities.
interrupt you because my time has expired, but I appreciate your answers and all the work that you're doing in this important area, and I yield back.
And thank you very much, sometime Ranking Member Kathy Manning. We now proceed to Congresswoman Amada Radhawagan of American Samoa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairwoman, and ranking members for holding this important hearing. Let's go back to the Maldives for a minute. There's no change in the budget request dedicated to Maldives for FY 2025. What is your plan to ramp up bilateral cooperation with the Maldives as the PRC increases its cooperation with the Maldives in security and infrastructure?
Thank you very much for the question. I do think the investments we're making in small island nations throughout the Indo-Pacific is tremendously important. The Maldives is tiny, a tiny population of less than 1 million people. They have the geographic waters, though, territorial waters, the size of France. It's enormous. And who controls those waters controls much of the Indian Ocean. So we want the Maldivian people to control their waters, not the Chinese, not us, not anyone else. They should have sovereignty over their territory. We are, in fact, requesting almost 5% increase in the money in 2025 for the Indo-Pacific. Some of that money, including increase, would go to the Maldives. We are looking at how to spend money from the Indo-Pacific supplemental that was passed recently by the Congress to go to the Maldives. But the most important thing we can do is have diplomats on the ground engaging every day with the government. We have an ambassador, we have a USAID team, we have State Department officials, we have local Maldivians who work for our embassy. That's all through the generosity of this Congress, and we appreciate it.
A third of the Maldives' debt is attributed to Chinese loans. A third of the Maldives' GDP comes from tourism, in which China is the top contributor. What's the administration doing to help Maldives decrease its dependency on China? I think you've answered that partially already.
They want Americans to come and spend your money in the Maldives. I have been there a couple of times. It's worth the visit. It's an extraordinary place. But you're right to say the Chinese are the #1 provider of tourism this year. Last year was the Indians. Before, you had a lot of Russians going there. Maldives is an attractive destination for global tourism, and who goes there depends on who can have the money to pay for the tickets to go. And honestly, I would love to see more people from Europe, the United States, and the whole rest of the world find this part of the world, because the more we pay attention to places like the Maldives, the more they will appreciate they should take the best from our culture as well as from the Chinese and everywhere else, so that we can compete on an even playing field.
So what is the threat to U.S. interests of increasing Chinese presence in the Maldives' security apparatus and critical infrastructure?
I would mention a couple of things. We are watching very closely what the Chinese are doing in Sri Lanka, and I would argue that the Sri Lankans have effectively kept the Chinese at bay in terms of their military interests, right? There's no military basing for the Chinese in Sri Lanka. And that's because through the Paris Club and other partners, we have effectively helped the Sri Lankans to restructure their loans to China and the rest of the world without the Chinese being able to use it as leverage to get all sorts of things they want. The Maldives hasn't even begun that process yet. They will need support from all of us, from USAID, technical advisors, from Development Finance Corporation competing for contracts, from the Japanese and from the Australians, all of us working together so that the Maldivians have options. If we let the Chinese build everything, provide every loan, there's no question that in a few years that'll just be a Chinese colony. It's up to us to be there to compete so that we level the playing field.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, beloved member of American Samoa, Amata Radawagan. Now we proceed to Congressman Andy Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the two of you for coming on out. I think I just want to kind of pick up where it was left off because I'd love to get your thoughts, both of you. Just help me understand, what are the objectives and priorities of the Chinese government in the region? We talked about the Maldives. Secretary Liu, you just talked about, Sri Lanka. I thought that was a really important insight. But can you help me understand, where are they prioritizing? Where are we seeing their growing footprint? What are some of their objectives for us to be able to understand at a deeper, more nuanced level?
I know this is an oversimplification, but I would argue the Chinese plan is to have a military base in every country, and every infrastructure project is made with high-interest Chinese loans and low-paid Chinese workers. We just see this model all throughout the region. I mentioned my time in the Kyrgyz Republic. What I didn't mention is when there was a revolution in 2020, the tradition in the Kyrgyz Republic is that the day after a revolution, we've had 3 of them there, the police, they don't fire on their own people, they just sort of melt away. And there's a little lawlessness that happens actually for a few days. This time in 2020, what did people do? They didn't attack American investments or European investments or Turkish investments. They attacked Chinese business. They went after gold mines, copper mines, textile mills. They put 40 Chinese workers of the 25,000 that are in Kyrgyzstan in the hospital by stoning them. They physically conducted violence against Chinese investment. Why? People are pissed. They're pissed that the Chinese bring in their own workers. They don't actually train local workers to do their enterprises. They extract minerals, literally take gold and copper from the ground and just ship it back for processing in China. They don't spend any money in local communities. This is going to have a boomerang effect for Chinese businesses and their interests. We talked about Pakistan and the investments there, $26 billion. They put a huge amount of money in Pakistan. I actually don't see them putting a dime in there right now because they're really worried about whether they're going to get their money back there, right? Their really terrible investment strategy is biting them in the ass. And we have an opportunity to do a better job to make sure countries know there are options and they don't have to be beholden to one.
I understand that you're saying, look, this is an ambition of theirs to be able to do this everywhere, but are there particular countries, particular parts of the region that you think we need to be taking some extra steps right now to show that there are options and that there are choices there?
We just talked about small island nations. I don't cover East Asia, but my colleagues who do that say this is a real battleground for influence right now. I would add to that our discussion about Sri Lanka and the Maldives, who controls those islands in terms of influence, controls the waters around them. And so we need to be conscious that those countries should be able to control their own sovereignty. They should make their own decisions. They shouldn't have military basing of the PRC in their countries. They shouldn't allow PRC submarines to operate with impunity in their waters. All of that is critical. And so you can see there's a lot of work by this administration on small island nations right now.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to just shift gears, if you don't mind. Just a lot of us had paid some attention to Bangladesh recently, and Secretary Blinken back in May released a statement announcing a visa sanction policy leading up to the election, and he noted, I'll just read you the quote here, that they were intended to deter, quote, the use of violence to prevent people from exercising their right to freedoms of association and peaceful assembly. And that was referring to it by any political party. So I guess I just wanted to get some clarification, ask you, are persons who sanction violence against peaceful protests putting themselves at risk of being designated under Section 7031C? I just want to get a sense of where that stands.
Yes, sir. This is actually a new use of this part of the law to not sanction people after they've done terrible things, but to warn people in Bangladesh in this circumstance that if you were to commit violence, electoral violence, you would be unable, or your family members, to enter the United States or to manipulate the elections. The Secretary of State did actually apply these sanctions in September on a number of individuals from the opposition, from government, and in the police forces. And we believe that these elections were less violent than the last two in Bangladesh, in part due to both government and opposition taking a step back because of the threat of sanction.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Andy Kim. And we now proceed to Dr. Jim Baird, Congressman of Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our witnesses for being here today. I serve on the Ag Committee, and we're currently doing a farm bill that's done every 5 years. But a part of that farm bill is the soft diplomacy, so to speak, where we provide the commodities, or farmers and ranchers provide, the USDA provides the commodities for USAID. And so my question then deals with that audit that in May of 24, where SIGAR found that State Department and USAID have failed to comply with their own internal policies on implementing partner reporting requirements regarding payments made to the Taliban. Furthermore, SIGAR found that state and USAID do not require robust reporting on taxes paid to the Taliban beyond customs and VAT payments. So my question is, does the administration feel the state and USAID have sufficient reporting requirements in place regarding payments made by implementing partners to the Taliban?
Yes, sir. Thank you. If you allow me, maybe I would say 2 words and then turn over to my much smarter colleague, Änjali Kaur.
That'd be great. That's a double barrel.
Sir, we really respect the work that SIGAR has done. In addition to that, State Department, USAID, Office of the Inspector General, and the Congress more generally. These are important oversight functions. We take it seriously. We are committed to cooperation with these investigations. SIGAR found $11 million they believe to have gone to the Taliban out of a total of $8.3 billion for all international humanitarian assistance. So that's not specific to U.S. government money. That's all of us. Okay, we're about 25% of the pie, so we're not a small percentage, but it wasn't that the U.S. government provided this money. And as I mentioned before, what they found was these implementers were reporting that they were paying utility fees that did end up with Taliban rule because they run the utilities. They were paying licensing fees to local administration that happened to be Taliban. They were doing things that looked like taxation to most of us, which is bad. We don't like when our assistance is taxed anywhere in the world. We keep track of that. We typically deduct that money the next year from the assistance that we provide to those countries. We are looking very closely at the work that SIGAR has provided for us. It's a real service that they do for all of us to keep track of this, and we are looking at the procedures that we have in place. Änjali?
Great, thanks. I just want to, agree with the Assistant Secretary on not only how seriously we take this report, but we also issued a Hill note to ensure this was on your radar. And we have since briefed the Hill multiple times on the report and its recommendations. So we agree that we should help ensure that responsible officials include foreign tax reporting requirements in applicable award agreements and collect required foreign tax reports from implementing partners. We believe in the importance of further strengthening oversight and will continue to assess the feasibility of incorporating additional reporting requirements into awards. And we also believe that it's critical, when applicable, to maintain records in accordance with OFAC requirements. And so, independent of the SIGAR report, we've considered broader reporting, broader reporting requirements specifically for its acquisition and assistance awards. And we have been proactively working to issue a request for information in the Federal Register to solicit public input on incorporating increased data collection into our awards. And if approved, this change would increase data collection to provide more granular information on, for instance, taxes and fees, and we'd welcome your guidance on ideas as we move this process forward.
Thank you. You know, the other thing that bothers me a little bit about from the commodities, originally I think the commodities were supposed to be shipped on American ships and be American products. But we have moved to doing it in a in-kind kind of purchase or even to cash. And so we've only got 35 seconds, and I know you can't answer that real quick, but I'm just concerned that we are efficiently, and you just mentioned that, efficiently using those funds to do what we need to do. So,
Sir, fully support using American ships and American products, and let us get you a written response on what that means in the Afghanistan context.
excellent. I appreciate that. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jim Barrett of Indiana. We now proceed to Congressman Gabe Amo of South Carolina Heritage from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If only I were so lucky. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Liu. Good to see you again. Ms. Kaur, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Just last week, we marked the 4th anniversary of the passing of legendary Congressman John Lewis. While we continue to celebrate his ongoing legacy, a key program to highlight is the Gandhi King Scholarly Exchange Initiative Act, which was signed into law in December 2020. Named for 2 civil rights icons, this initiative creates a partnership between the United States and India to address global development challenges like climate change, education, and economic empowerment for women. Ms. Kaur, I was pleased to see that last month you signed a statement of intent with the government of India to formally establish the Gandhi King Development Foundation by this October. Can you share a little bit about what this agreement means for the actual implementation of the Gandhi King Development Foundation and how Congress and the folks on my side of the ledger can continue to ensure that the implementation stays on track?
Thank you. That's a great question. We were really excited about signing this agreement last month and having Ranking Member Meeks there to witness it, especially given all of his support. So what this has enabled us to do is actually now have meetings that exist on a biweekly basis. We've got a working group that's established between the Ministry of External Affairs and our teams here at USAID, along with the Indian Embassy here, where we work on finalizing the governance structure, where we work on finalizing the approach in terms of contractual ways. How do we work with FCRA in India? So a number of these ways in terms of both governance operationally to set this institution foundation up, which would then allow us post-October to actually start working directly with the private sector, thinking about those innovative ways to be able to address key development challenges. That's the gist of the Gandhi King Development Foundation, is really to bring in the private sector to address development. And you know how robust the private sector is in India. So together with the US, we think it would be a great partnership. And thank you for your support. We believe that we're on the right track. Things seem to be moving forward quite quickly. We've already had our first meeting last week. And so as we continue to progress on this, we can provide updates as leading up to October and how we plan on finalizing and marking the occasion of its establishment.
Well, thank you. I look forward to being as supportive as possible. And your citation of the private sector is a good segue to my next question. In September 2023, President Biden was the first U.S. president to hold a meeting with all 5 Central Asian heads of state during the C5+1 presidential summit, a really important event. And together, they announced the New York Declaration, an agreement to strengthen U.S. partnership with Central Asian nations through security cooperation, democratic governance, and increasing economic resilience. As part of this plan, the State Department supported the +1 forum in March 2024 to support connections to global markets through private investment in Central Asia. The forum was an essential first step, bringing together over 400 business associations from Central Asia and the United States together. But we know that more can and should be done to improve our economic ties to Central Asia and continue the work of the New York Declaration. Assistant Secretary Liu, could you share a bit of how the U.S. is working with the U.S., or our country and our government is working with the private sector here to expand our economic ties with Central Asia, and what are some opportunities and challenges to streamline and strengthen those ties?
Thank you, Representative Amo. In fact, American companies have some pretty robust ties. They tend to be in the oil and gas sector. So we're the #2 biggest investor in Kazakhstan, for example, but almost all of that is ExxonMobil, right? It is a huge investment in energy, and we are leading in terms of technology and safe operation of our investments in Central Asia. We are seeing some innovative new things happening now in other parts of Central Asia. We have what will hopefully be up to a $10 billion investment in Uzbekistan to build natural gas importation mechanism to gasify cities there. So they are able to provide heat and electricity with some of the natural resources native to Central Asia. We're seeing in other places interest in U.S. investment for importation of equipment, right? Caterpillar has long had a presence in the region because these are big agricultural areas, John Deere. But I will admit that there isn't the awareness of some American manufacturing that we would like. And so some of the things that we have done in the past is do trade missions for trade and franchising, right? You can go anywhere in the world and find a Starbucks or a McDonald's except in Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan or Turkmenistan. I would love it if we bring some of our leading brands to this part of the world. And the Russians and the Chinese, where we don't exist, they have rip-offs of our brands, right? We could be spreading American business much more deeply to Central Asia, and our ambassadors and our teams on the ground are trying every day to do that.
Well, thank you, thank you, Assistant Secretary. And as we export these brands, we export American identity. And so I hope that we're able to stay focused on that mission as well. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Gabe Amo of Rhode Island. We now proceed to Congressman Brian Mast of Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to begin by piggybacking on a question that my colleague, Mr. Baird, was just speaking to you about, the Special Investigator Report for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Did you just say that of the roughly $11 million that went to the Taliban, most of it didn't come from America? Is that something you just said?
That's
I feel like
correct.
I heard that.
So it is a total amount of humanitarian assistance that CIGAR was looking at.
From
8.3
implementing
billion.
partners, you're saying?
International donors, correct.
The CIGAR report said it came from State Department and from implementing partners, from USAID implementing partners is what the CIGAR report says.
So I believe that part of it came from us because we're a quarter of all implementing agencies, but the actual report was about 8.3 billion, which is the total amount of all donors. 11 million was identified
So
as
you
going
do
to the top.
consider dollars going through USAID implementing partners, dollars coming from America, correct?
Absolutely, but I would argue it means that probably all 11 million didn't come from the U.S. government, likely.
Yeah, that's not what
25%.
CIGAR said at all. And so you literally just came here, answered to my friend Mr. Baird, something that was not founded in that CIGAR report whatsoever. Did you two sit for CIGAR for deposition?
I did not.
Did you? So you consider CIGAR so important to respond to them, but neither of you sat for deposition. Were you requested to sit
It was
for
not
deposition?
requested.
Not at all. Did you offer any information to them to help them with their reports?
My bureau offered thousands of person hours to support the collection of information. For the
No, I want to continue on this. Ma'am, did you say that they will self-suspend if, in fact, there are dollars going to being grifted off of it by somebody else?
If there is any suspicion of diversion, yes, they will.
Did that happen with Afghanistan?
Yes, that did.
It's self-suspended.
We've had organizations self-suspend when they have noticed that they have been asked to bring in specific staff members or they're being managed
Which
in some way.
organizations self-suspended?
We've had, and we can do this in a closed door setting.
I'd prefer to do it in an open door setting right
But
now.
some of this will cause reprisal, but there's a number of organizations
That's
that
okay.
we
It's
have.
the American taxpayer dollar. It should cause reprisal with them. It's their money.
I can provide you that information. I can provide you more details
You
afterwards.
should provide it right now.
I will get you that information
When?
soon after this hearing,
How soon?
today.
Today. Okay, good. We'll look for it. That's a fair enough answer. I think the American people want to hear it, but if you're going to give it today, that's it's better than nothing. So, but you're saying the dollars going into Afghanistan, at what point did it self-suspend? How did it reach the number of 10.9 million if it's self-suspended? And to follow on that slightly, have they self-suspended with what's going on in Gaza and the dollars going to Hamas? Has that ever occurred? I know that's not your bureau necessarily. but-
Cannot speak to that, yeah.
So to go back to this, when did it self-suspend?
We are speaking about specific programs when they have noticed points of diversion, potential diversion. Those were moments of self-suspension where they then assess the situation. I cannot go into the amounts specifically in terms of how that affected budgets, but we can get back to you with specifics afterwards.
So going back to the U.S. implementing partners, how many of the implementing partners actually responded to the CGAR report? Because according to CGAR, very few were compliant in actually responding. This number created, 10.9 billion, was just of those that actually responded, most didn't.
I don't know the exact number.
Have you put a policy in place to say that if somebody didn't respond to CGAR, that they will receive no more dollars?
We have encouraged all partners to respond as requested.
No, but have you put a policy in place that if they did not respond to our Special Investigator General for Afghanistan and Reconstruction, that they will not receive another dollar from you, of the American people's? It's the American people's money. If they don't want to respond to our questioning about how it was spent, did you put a policy in place that said they won't get a penny?
I do not believe so.
Why not?
But we can get back to you on that. I'm not sure about those
Let's stick with you
specifics.
don't believe so, because I don't believe you have either. Why not?
I don't have a response to that.
Well, let's work through that. Do you think you should?
We will work with our team.
Do you think you should?
We
If
should-
somebody didn't answer to America about getting our money and then spending it and it going to terrorists, should you be giving them money? Do you think you should put that program in place, that they're not going to get any? It's
We
common sense.
respect the CIGAR report, and we have provided as much support and as much information as we can provide, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time. According to CGAR, it does say that State Department and USAID have failed to comply with their own internal policies on implementing partner reporting requirements regarding payments made to the Taliban. Furthermore, CGAR found that State and USAID did not require robust reporting on taxes paid to the Taliban beyond customs and VAT payments. That's specifically what CGAR said. So I think CGAR is in staunch disagreement with what you're trying to present to us today. I do hope that you decide to not send any more money to people that don't answer to us, because it's the money of the American people.
Thank you very much, Congressman Brian Mast of Florida. We now proceed to Congressman Bill Keating of Massachusetts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been concerned for some time looking at some of the undemocratic activity occurring in Bangladesh. It's really come to a head with the recent reports that in particularly college students coming forth with concerns on the civil service law in Bangladesh, the response of the government to those types of protests has been exceedingly violent. There are reports that at least 175 people, mostly young people, have been killed in that process. Can you talk about what's going on in terms of some backsliding in the democratic process in Bangladesh, what concerns you have for some of the more violent activity, some of the journalists disappearing, some people disappearing, and with their relatives and friends and family cannot even find what happened to them. But in particular, what the State Department, what we can do with our own U.S. partnership with Bangladesh in terms of next steps. If we can do something to reiterate our support for many of the Bangladesh people that are just trying to engage in protest with some of these activities, and any endangerment to the rule of law in that country.
Thank you, Representative Keating. We have been following very closely this past week the violence in Bangladesh. We've condemned that violence. We've called on the government to respect freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. We've called upon the government to restore internet to the country, which has been off now for several days. You will be aware that there is a curfew that has been put in place by the government as a response to some of the violence that's happened. Some in police have said there's a shoot-on-sight order for anyone involved in violence.
That's what I heard.
And so we have condemned from the spokesperson of the State Department the shoot-on-sight order and asked them to roll that back. It's a very tense moment in Bangladesh between protesters and the government. We hope that that calm is restored. I have been in touch with senior leaders in Bangladesh. We remain in touch with them now to try to encourage them to find a peaceful way to resolve this crisis.
We had put some sanctions on earlier in the year. Will any of those sanctions be useful in trying to curb this kind of activity?
Well, again, those sanctions were specific to election violence and election manipulation. So there are sanctions, of course, that Congress has given authority to the administration to use in case of gross abuses of human rights. Perhaps some of those would be helpful.
In terms of some of the people that have gone missing, the reports of so many people, particularly in the political opposition and journalists and other people that have been speaking out, do you have any comments on that kind of activity that's gone on? There's just literally, I think the numbers in the several hundred people.
Correct. I think just in the last few days, we have seen a press reporting about the arrest of hundreds of people in the opposition and perhaps with student protesters as well.
In terms of Russia-Chinese influence in Bangladesh in that area, have you seen any things that are concerning in that regard as well?
So I would say the most influential country in Bangladesh is actually not Russia or China, it's India. And we have a really active dialogue with India about our policies in Bangladesh and throughout the wider region. We are concerned about the possibility of growing Chinese presence in Bangladesh, but I would say the Bangladeshis have been pretty careful about not overextending.
Quickly changing gears if there's time to answer. But there's another concern too with Central Asian countries and the influence they have supporting Russia in their illegal war with Ukraine.
Well, what we know is that many countries, witting or unwitting, have been transit points for American or other G7 technology to Russia that Russia has used in its production of weapons that they use on the battlefield in Ukraine. We are trying very hard to prevent that. And we have had delegations travel to at least 3 of the 5 Central Asian countries, the ones that have primarily been the target of this diversion activity, to get cooperation. I'm actually pleased to say all of them have been received at a high level. In many cases, those diversion activities have been stopped. It's whack-a-mole. Wherever we stop it, it pops up again somewhere else. So Departments of Commerce, Treasury, and State have been working on this intensively for the past 2.5 years.
Well, the chairman and myself are on the subcommittee in Europe, and we're looking very closely at that issue and working on a bipartisan basis and cooperating in that regard. I would just conclude asking you to monitor closely and see what we can do to stop that kind of violence in Bangladesh. And I yield back.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Congressman Keating. And I want to thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony and the members for their questions. This has really been terrific to have Chairwoman Young Kim here as we work together, and even bipartisan with, of course, Dean Phillips, our ranking, and even good work by Bill Keating from Massachusetts. And so, gee whiz, I've never seen somebody run so fast. Anyway.
We came back for the compliment.
Well, here. But the bottom line is, the members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for witnesses. We want to ask that you respond to those in writing. Additionally, I want to thank the staff we're all doing multiple meetings. Chairwoman Kim has been to 5 different meetings as we've been proceeding today. And so there's a good reason she has on tennis shoes. Pursuant to the committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements and questions and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the committee shall stand adjourned.